then it will mean to the disbelievers that give up your idols and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if it is used in the context of the hypocrites, then it will mean that, oh hypocrites, give up your lying, give up your cheating, and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously last week and the week before, we looked at the word u'budu, and we looked at how comprehensive this particular word is, u'budu. The u'budu, worship your Lord, isn't just restricted to namaz, fasting, zakat and hajj, but the word u'budu is such a word which means to obey and submit yourself to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anything which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered us to do, like for example being kind to your parents, being kind to the poor, the needy, the destitute, the orphans, then all that comes under the ambit of ibadah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering the people, u'budu rabbakum. And then verse number 21 concludes by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning some attributes of himself. And the idea of these attributes are to show people that he is the only worthy of worship, and no other deity, no other being is worthy of worship. That only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy of being worshipped. Why? Because alladhi khalaqakum, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Lord is the one who created you, wallazina min qablikum, and he also created those before you. And similarly, verse number 22, again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions some other attributes, again indicating and to show that he is only worthy of worship. No other idol, no other kind of creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy of worship, but only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ja'ala lakum al-arda firasha, that he has made this zameen, he has made this land and earth flat. Firashan here means like a bed, indicating that it is easy to walk on, it is soft to walk on, it's not difficult to walk, it's not too hard to walk on. But sama'a bina'a, similarly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a sky for us, and this sky acts as a roof. وَأَنزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَأَخْرَجَ بِهِ مِنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ رِزْقًا لَكُمْ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say that from the sky, rain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends rain, and through this raindrops various types of fruits and vegetables are grown, and these fruits and vegetables will be eat, rizqan lakum, which is a source of provision for us. So that was like the conclusion of verse number 21 and 22. And from verse number 21, 22, there is like a subtle indication. And the subtle indication is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to show everyone and wanted to show the reader and the listener to the Holy Quran that all the people, i.e. the creation, i.e. the servants, the animals and so on, they are all helpless, that they are all ajiz. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is qadir and he is the most powerful. And the way that is mentioned is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just trying to remind everyone and tell everyone that look, I am only worthy of worship. No king, no queen, no creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy of worship. Why? Because I created you. That sun, that moon, that king, that queen, he didn't create you. Similarly, number 2, وَالَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكُمْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also created the people before you. That sun which you may worship, that king which you may worship, that moon or that star which you may worship, that didn't create anything. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say that this world, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this world, again, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did it. The creator, the Khaliq did it. No king, no queen, no star, no moon, anything like that did that. So from these two verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing the helplessness of the creation. That the creation of Allah, they didn't create anything. Okay? It's only the creator, the Khaliq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he created everything. So from these two verses, the helplessness, the id of the people and the creation are found or are determined, hence again indicating towards the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now if we move ahead, or if we look at verse number 23, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ, that if you are in doubt. Now this وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ, verse number 23, again there is another subtle indication here. And the subtle indication from this verse number 23 is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again is going to show the helplessness of the people. And through this way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to establish the greatness of the Holy Quran, and then from that He's going to establish the greatness of Himself. Now what verse number 23 is going to mention is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to lay out a challenge here. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to say to these disbelievers that if you are in doubt that this word isn't my word, that this word is in fact some words of some magician or some words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is laying out a challenge and a gauntlet that bring forward a verse or bring forward a surah of the Holy Quran. And because these people wouldn't be or would be helpless, or they would not be able to do it, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is again showing the helplessness of these people, and at the same time is showing the greatness of the Holy Quran. And obviously because the words of the Holy Quran, i.e. the verses which we have been reciting so far and which we recite every day, they are in fact the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now what we read here, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ, it's not like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's words, but these are directly the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to us. So from there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to show His greatness. Now if we have a look at this particular verse in more detail, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ, that if you are in doubt, مِمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا, in that which we have revealed. Nazzalna means what we have revealed, ala abdina, to our servant. Now verse number 23 begins by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that if you are in doubt. Now what the verse, or what this particular verse is trying to say, is that from the beginning of Surah Al-Fatiha until Surah Al-Baqarah, we've read say around 27 verses. And these 27 verses, if a person was to study them closely, if a person was to analyze these verses closely, then he would recognize and he would realize that these words are not the words of a human being. That they're not the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're not the words of some kind of magician, as the disbelievers would say. But in fact, these are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from verse number 23 is saying, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ, that if we still have that doubt. The word raib in Arabic means doubt, but obviously the word raib can be, like the word doubt, can be explained in many different ways. Like sometimes you may have a lot of doubt, sometimes you may have a little bit of doubt. So here the word raib actually comes to show a little bit of doubt. The word actually raib in Arabic language means or signifies a little bit of doubt. So you've read 22 verses. There should be no doubt by now that these are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You shouldn't be like, be in between. You shouldn't be like the hypocrites now, like be in between. You should know by verse number 22 that what we have read so far, the ruku which we have read, the section which we have read, these are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then from verse number 23, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, look, if we still have that little bit of doubt, that still few percent doubt that whether it is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whether it is the words of some magician or some prophet or anything, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is laying down the challenge. And He says, فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ, that bring forward a surah like this. Bring forward, فَأْتُوا means bring forward, bring this surah, i.e. a chapter, a surah, مِن مِثْلِهِ, like this, i.e. like the words of the Holy Quran. If you think that this is not the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if you think that this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has made up and he has written it in a book and so on, and he is saying all these things, then bring forward a surah. Now the word surah literally means anything restricted or anything limited. So anything small, anything restricted, anything like a little piece of something, that's what the word surah means literally. And the technical meaning of surah is like a chapter. So here the word fa'tu bi surah can mean both. That either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking, or you could take the literal meaning here, that bring forward something small, like a small verse of the Holy Quran, or bring forward half a verse of the Holy Quran. Or you could take the technical meaning, and that is that bring forward a chapter of the Holy Quran. Min misli this, i.e. like the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say, وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ, and call your helpers. Shuhada here means call your helpers besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has laid down the challenge that bring forward a surah or a small verse of the Holy Quran. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this challenge which I have set you, you don't have to do it individually. It's not like an individual challenge. It's not like an individual exam where you will be like tested and this challenge is just for you. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم, that bring forward all your helpers. Bring forward Shakespeare, bring forward any other poet which you know, and tell him or you together, work together to bring a verse of the Holy Quran. وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم. Now the word shuhada literally means witnesses. And the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the word witnesses here, shuhada, is to tell us that the same way a witness, he helps the defendant in the court of law. Like in a court of law, the witness actually helps the defendant. So here, the literal meaning of shuhada is used, i.e. helpers. So it doesn't mean bring forward your witnesses, but it means that bring forward your helpers. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that bring forward your helpers, your supporters, those who may assist you and help you, min dunillah, besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to bring forward a verse of the Holy Quran, to bring forward a chapter of the Holy Quran, in kuntum sadiqeen, if you are true. If you are true, meaning that if you still have that doubt, if you still have that reservation, that whether this is the verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether in fact this is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is laying down the gauntlet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, okay, bring forward a verse, bring forward a chapter of the Holy Quran, and we see whether this is the speech of Allah or whether it is the speech of a normal human being. From verse number 24, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا. And if you do not, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا, if you do not, وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا, and you never shall. Now from verse number 24, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by saying, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا, that if you cannot fulfill this challenge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is challenging the disbelievers that, okay, bring forward a verse of the Holy Quran. But if you, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا, but if you cannot fulfill this challenge, if you cannot bring forward a verse of the Holy Quran, if you cannot bring forward a chapter of the Holy Quran, and then the next part Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا, and you never shall. Meaning that this is such a challenge which these people, the disbelievers, could never ever fulfill. Sometimes a teacher or someone, he may give a challenge. He may say that do this, do that, run around a building, say for example, under a minute. So there may be some occasions where you may be able to fulfill that challenge. But in this particular verse, verse number 24, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala using the word وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا, and those who study Arabic will know that the word lan means that never, that this will never ever happen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that this challenge, if you cannot do it, وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا, and by the way, this challenge will never ever be fulfilled, this challenge will never ever happen, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning these people, فَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ, that guard yourself from the fire, وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ, the fuel will be the people and nas wal hijara, and the stones. So this particular verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making it very clear that, bringing forward a verse of the Holy Quran, bringing forward a chapter and a surah of the Holy Quran, the disbelievers, they wouldn't be able to do it. وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا, they shall never ever be able to do it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning them, warning those people that, look, forget all your challenges, forget thinking about challenging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accept that these are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accept this is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because if you don't believe in the Holy Quran, then what will happen to you? فَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي, then beware, save yourself, fear the fire, and nar, i.e. Jahannam, the fire of hell, وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ, the fuel of Jahannam will be the people, wal-hijara, and the stones, and the fire of hell, uiddat lil-kafirin, has been prepared for the disbelievers. Now from these two verses which we have looked at, one thing which we can understand is regarding the importance of the Holy Quran. And when we look at the Holy Quran, and by reading the Holy Quran, we can easily determine that this is a miracle, an everlasting miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the people. Now many scholars have written books regarding the Holy Quran. In particular, Imam Suyuti rahmatullah alayh. And Imam Suyuti rahmatullah alayh has, just very briefly, has mentioned a few amazing facts about the Holy Quran. That why the Holy Quran outshines and outweighs other books. And what do you mean by other books here? Means the other revealed books such as the Torah and the Injil, and similarly other books such as like novels and reading books which are available in this world. The first thing which Imam Suyuti rahmatullah alayh has mentioned is that the Holy Quran is comprehensive. It's one of those books which you will find everything. A novel, say for example like a horror novel, then that is just restricted to one thing, that is to make you scared. Then you've got like a love story, a love kind of novel, then that is again is restricted. But the Holy Quran is such a book which has got everything. It's just one of those comprehensive books which you will find in the world, and no other book can match the Holy Quran in terms of its how comprehensive it is. And what do you mean by the comprehensive nature of the Holy Quran? It's basically that in the Holy Quran you will find everything. You will find stories of the previous nations. You will find rulings. You will find, like for example, stories of prophets. You will find, like for example, ahkams, rulings. There's other things such as like hikmat. Hikmat means like wisdom and so on. So many things which I've already mentioned before. These things can be found in the Holy Quran. So that is one particular quality and attribute of the Holy Quran. The second attribute of the Holy Quran is that this book has been written like a poem. It's been written like not written, but it's been revealed like a poem. The way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the words of the Holy Quran, the verses of the Holy Quran, He revealed it like a poem. Let's say for example, take Surah Al-Baqarah. As I mentioned before, that Surah Al-Baqarah is one of those surahs and chapters which is known for its rulings, ahkam, that read namaz, give zakat, for example, fasting, hajj, all these masail and rulings can be found in Surah Al-Baqarah. Now if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted, He could have just listed everything. He could have said, okay, read namaz, zakat, give this much zakat, go for hajj once in a lifetime, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. He could have listed it. But instead, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't choose that particular way. For example, if you open books such as like Salimul Haq, which talks about namaz and purification, there are many things which are listed. And if, for example, somebody was to write a book on namaz, you will find many rulings and masail which are just listed, that this is the ruling, 6 wajibats or namaz, or this is many sunnah of namaz, this many farais of namaz, so on. They are all listed. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has mentioned the rulings, He has mentioned the stories, but He's mentioned it in a poetic way. It's like mentioned in a rhyme, it's like mentioned in a poem. So that again is another attribute of the Holy Quran which distinguishes the Holy Quran from other books such as the Torah and the Injil, and similarly other kind of novels and fictional books. A third quality of the Holy Quran, and this third quality indicates that this in fact is the speech and the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that the Holy Quran has predicted many prophecies. And all these prophecies have happened, have occurred, and they are inshallah going to happen in the future. And a good example of a prophecy which the Holy Quran has mentioned, which has already occurred, is the story which inshallah we look at in Surah Al-Rum, where it talks about this battle between the Persians and the Romans. Now the background of this battle was that during or just before Rasulullah migrated to Medina Munawwara, the Persians and the Romans, they had a battle. Now obviously both of them are disbelievers, by the way. As you know, the Romans, they are more Christian, and the Persians, they were fire worshippers. So they were both non-Muslims, they were both disbelievers. However, the Muslims, because the Christians, because they are known as Ahl Kitab, i.e. a religion sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so the Muslims wanted the Romans, i.e. the Christians, to win. Whereas the idol worshippers of Makkah, they wanted the Persians, because the Persians were fire worshippers, they wanted them to win. So what happened was that there was a battle, and the fire worshippers, i.e. the Persians, they defeated the Romans. After this defeat, the idol worshippers of Makkah, they started taunting the Muslims, and they started saying to the Muslims that, look, the Persians, they defeated Rome, the Romans, i.e. the Christians, and there will be a time when we will defeat you. So they started taunting the Muslims, upon which the verse of Surah Al-Rum was revealed, that Alif Lam Mim, Ghulibatil Rum. That Ghulibatil Rum means that the Romans, they have been defeated fi adna al-ardi, in a nearby land, i.e. this battle happened in Syria, fi adna al-ard. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. And this is like the prophecy Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that don't worry, in a few years time, a few years time, the Romans will defeat the Persians. And what happened was that during the Battle of Badr, when the Muslims were defeating the disbelievers, during that battle, news was received that the Romans had defeated the Persians. So this is a prophecy which happened during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Holy Quran quite clearly saying that, okay, the Romans were defeated now, but in a few years' time, what will happen is that the Romans would take revenge and they will defeat the Persians. So again, good example of where the Holy Quran has laid down a particular prophecy, and the prophecy turned out to be true. And the fourth quality of the Holy Quran is that the Quran is such a book where it has an effect on a person's heart. And there are many stories, and I mentioned some of these stories before, which led to Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu becoming a Muslim. And similarly also led another Sahabi in the name of Jubair bin Mut'im radiallahu anhu becoming a Muslim. Why? How did he become a Muslim? It was just by listening to the verses of the Holy Quran. That when these Sahabas, when they listened to the Holy Quran, then the words of the Holy Quran, because it's a speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it had such an effect on their hearts that they became Muslims straight away. So that again is another distinctive feature of the Holy Quran. A book, say, or a novel, something, a sad tale, then it may have an effect on your heart for just like a second or so. Then after that you think, oh, okay, just a story, just fictional, and so on. But the verses of the Holy Quran, the speech of the Holy Quran is such that it changes people's religion. It changes people's ideologies. People, they may have thought about something, their ideology may have been something, but when they listen to the Holy Quran, when they read the Holy Quran, then they change their ideologies, they change their life, they change everything about themselves, and they now become like proper, true Muslims and true believers. So these are just four like attributes of the Holy Quran which I have just mentioned to you. Verse number 25 of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبَشِّرِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أَنَّ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ. That give glad tidings to الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, to those who believe, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and who do good deeds, أَنَّ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ. That for them there will be gardens. Jannat, the Muradini, there will be gardens, تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِ الْأَنْهَارِ, and beneath these gardens there will be rivers flowing. Now, as I mentioned before, this was right at the beginning of the Tafseer, the one quality about the Holy Quran is, the one you could say feature about the Holy Quran, is that wherever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about one category of people, then in the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will talk about the next category of people, or the opposite category of the people. Or if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about something, then in the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will talk about the total opposite. And if we look at verse number 24, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finishes that verse by talking about mentioning about Jahannam and the fire of hell. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the fire of hell, beware from this fire of hell. Why? Because the fuel of the men and the stone. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, uiddat lil kafirin. Then from verse number 25, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to talk about Jannah and paradise. Now, as I mentioned before, that it is one of the main beliefs of being a Muslim, of being a believer, that you believe in the hereafter, that you believe in life after death. And the time which we live in this world, the 50, 60 years or so, compared to our life in Jannah, inshallah, or our life in the hereafter, which is eternal, that 50, 60 years which we spend in this world is basically around 5 to 6 minutes. So that's how short our life is in this world. So therefore, it is important that we prepare for the hereafter. And as I discussed this particular matter and issue before, that even non-Muslims have said that the belief in the hereafter, they've categorized it or they phrased it as a revolutionary belief. Revolutionary insofar as that it's only when a person fears of the hereafter, that when he thinks about hereafter, that's when that person changes his life. Because just imagine that if there was no such thing as life after death, then this world or this area, this community would be in chaos. There will be many Muslims or many people who would commit adultery, who will commit zina, they will steal from other people, they will kill other people, and they will think that, oh, there's no problem, I'm not going to be punished in the hereafter, so let me just continue doing all these kind of acts, let me keep on swearing, let me keep on backbiting about someone, let me commit adultery, let me, for example, still continue drinking alcohol and so on. They will continue doing these kind of actions. But it's only when you think and fear about the fire of hell, fear about the tortures and the punishment the hereafter, that's when that person will change his life, that's when that person, he will rectify his life and he will sort himself out. That when he hears stories that if a person was to backbite in this world and he didn't seek forgiveness, then in the hereafter he will be scratching his face with metal, copper, lead, and it will cause his mouth and everything to be cut open, and then when that happens, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will restore his mouth and face again so that the azab and the punishment can continue. That when he hears that a person who commits adultery, then in the hereafter, in the fire of hell, he will be made to roast naked in a big massive fire. Those kind of things, makes people scared. And it is when they hear these kind of things about the hereafter and the punishment they will receive, that's what prevents the person from, engaging in those kind of acts. So as I mentioned before, that the hereafter is considered as a revolutionary belief. Now the topic of discussion here is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about Jannah and paradise. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is saying that you have to be a believer, and at the same time you have to do good deeds to be granted entry into paradise and Jannah. Now the belief of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is that if a person, if he's a Muslim, if he's a believer, but his whole life he spent in committing sins, in committing evil and bad action, then what will happen is that person will firstly enter Jahannam and will firstly enter the fire of hell. And he will be in fire of hell for a period only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. And then when he is clean and cleansed and purified from his sins, then that person will come out of the fire of hell and he will enter Jannah and he will enter paradise. And the hadith which I'll mention later supporting and indicating towards that particular fact. However, if a person who is a believer and at the same time in this world he did good deeds in this world, his good deeds outweigh the little sins which he may have done, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that from the beginning, أَنَّ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ, that these people will receive Jannat, these people will receive gardens, i.e. will receive paradise, and beneath these gardens there will be rivers of honey, rivers of wine, alcohol which will be flowing, and they will drink from these kind of rivers, and they will enjoy all the benefits and all the ni'mah and the blessings of the Jannah and of paradise. Now, from this particular verse number 25, I'm just going to go into more detail regarding paradise. That what is paradise, what things are there in paradise, and some just basic beliefs regarding paradise, and probably there's some ni'mah which we're going to touch on, some kind of blessings which we're going to touch on. There'll be some blessing which you probably would like to hear about, such as the Hureen and the heavenly wives and so on. So just a few things regarding them, and then what are the conditions and the criteria for a person to enter paradise and Jannah. Now the first belief, or the first thing which every Muslim should believe, is that Jannah, paradise, and the fire of hell, Jahannam, they have already been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even as we sit now here in this masjid, in this mosque, Jannah and Jahannam, they have already been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even Imam Tahawi rahmatullah alayh, in his Aqidah Tahawiyah, has mentioned that Jannah, paradise, and Jahannam, they have already been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there is a hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari which indicates towards this particular point that Jannah and Jahannam have already been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the hadith of Sahih Bukhari mentions a particular discussion and a dialogue between paradise and Jahannam and hell. And it's mentioned in the hadith that once the fire of hell said that I have been given the privilege of receiving the arrogant and the tyrant. That in me, i.e. in hell, in Jahannam, the arrogant people and the tyrants, the mutakabbirun, they will enter hell. And with regard to paradise, paradise then goes on to say that what is the matter with me? Only the weak and the humble amongst the people will enter. So paradise is saying that only the weak people and those who are humble, those who are in need, those who are needy, poor people, they will enter. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, upon this particular point, he enters into a discussion and he says to Jannah, he says to paradise, that you are my mercy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to paradise, that you are my mercy. And I will bestow my mercy to whomever, whichever slave and servant I want. Meaning that whichever servant I want him to enter paradise and Jannah, then I will put that servant into you. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the fire of hell and he says to hell that you are my azab, you are my means of punishment. And I shall punish whichever servant I wish to. Meaning that whichever servant has done bad and evil in this world, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send that servant to the fire of hell, and that fire of hell will be a means of punishment so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can punish that particular individual. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say that all of you, i.e. paradise and the fire of hell, you will be to your filth, meaning that all of you will be full to its maximum limit. And he goes on to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will put his foot inside Jahannam, inside the fire of hell, and he will press it down so that everything, so that the fire of hell can be squashed and squeezed together so that everyone can receive the pain of azab. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with regards to paradise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create a new creation to fill paradise and Jannah with. So this is the hadith of Sahih Bukhari. Obviously just the main point of this particular hadith is just to illustrate that paradise and the fire of hell and Jahannam have already been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next point with regards to Jannah and paradise is that Jannah and paradise is something which is unimaginable. I could sit here and just give you talks regarding Jannah, like Jannah you will receive this, you will receive that. But unless you kind of like experience it for yourself, then it's difficult to describe. Like many people, they are going for Hajj and they ask me that, well, what will happen, what will we see, and so on. So the advice I give is that I could give you the talks, I could give you the lectures that you do this, or this is how you pelt the Jamarat, or this is, you're going to be staying in Mina and in Arafah and so on. However, unless you experience it for yourself, then it's going to be difficult for you to realize. And the reason why is that because obviously our intellect and our sanity is just restricted to this world. Obviously things such as Jannah and paradise is outside our sanity, it's outside our intellect. So therefore, even through hadiths and through Quranic verses, we could describe the blessings a person will receive in Jannah and paradise, but it will be difficult for a person to totally comprehend and understand the ni'mah and the blessings of Jannah and paradise. Now, with regards to the ni'mah and the blessings of Jannah and paradise, a very famous hadith of Sahih al-Muslim, where it's a hadith Qudsi, and hadith Qudsi is known as sacred hadith. Sacred hadith is basically words, or the words, or you could say the topic, has been revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam through his own words says that. So that is hadith al-Qudsi. Whereas the Holy Quran, they are direct words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He directly reveals the verse through Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whereas the hadith al-Qudsi, the mazmoon, the topic, is given to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam through his own words describes what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant from this particular topic. And the hadith of Sahih Muslim is the hadith al-Qudsi, where the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that with regards to Jannah, he has said wala aynun ra'at, that Jannah and paradise is such a thing that no eye has ever seen, wala udhunun sami'at, and no ear has ever heard of, wala khatara ala qalbi bashar, and the human mind has never imagined of. Meaning that it's such a thing which no human being's eyes has ever seen, no ears has ever heard of, the singing of the various heavenly wives and the birds and the animals. No human ear has ever heard of that. And at the same time, وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ, the human mind has never ever thought or can cross the mind of the human, meaning that it's such a thing which you cannot imagine and cannot think of. And just to illustrate how, why we can't understand the ni'mah and the blessings of Jannah, is because it's mentioned in another hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, narrated by Sayyiduna Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas anhu, that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that if a fingernail size of any of the blessings of Jannah, fingernail, very, very small, but if a fingernail size of any of the blessings of Jannah was to fall on this earth, then it will illuminate the whole earth. Just look at the fingernail size is very, very small. Like some people, they have a habit of cutting the nails in the mouth. But sometimes you just see there, you can't even see. That's how small. So if a small inch or a bit of any of the ni'mah and the blessing was to fall on this earth, it will illuminate the whole earth. So we could imagine that how it's unimaginable how, the ni'mah and the blessings a person will receive in Jannah and in paradise. Inshallah, we'll continue with this particular topic next week. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act upon what's been said. Wa akhiru da'wan, alhamdulillah, rabbil alamin. Okay, does you have any questions? Allahumma